Zaza Okuashvili is not merely a businessman. In addition to founding Omega Group and Iberia TV Broadcasting Company, he has also served two appointments as Georgian MP. He was rewarded with the Golden Wing for contributions to freedom of media. However, fighting for freedom, justice, kindness, and the country's prosperity has always been the rule by which he lived. Any venture started by Mr. Okuashvili was implicitly based on creating something new, building up, employing people, improving the country's economic sustainability, and most importantly, choosing action over daydreams. His main wish is to live in a country where all citizens are judged by their worth. His main pride is his family, wife Natochkheidze and two sons, Rati and Georgi. Good evening, Open Studio is on air again. Our TV season, the first since its restoration, is approaching closure. And I doubt any of our viewers would argue that they have not been introduced to many interesting guests within our program's framework. As you have probably already guessed from the announcements, today we are going to introduce you to yet another such person, Zaza Okuashvili, founder of Iberia TV Company. Welcome, Mr. Okuashvili. Allow me to thank you for taking time to attend Open Studio's broadcast and most importantly, agreeing to this interview. However, before we start, I would like to tell our viewers something. I know that you always believe whatever I say here during this broadcast, and I would like to employ your trust yet again by claiming that I know Mr. Okuashvili as well as you do, meaning that we are going to get to know him together. There are several reasons for that. The first being that Mr. Okuashvili never interferes with our journalistic activity, editorial policy and topics presented by various programs on Iberia TV Year. Hence, my contact with him is quite rare. The second reason is that Mr. Okuashvili frequently travels abroad. Whenever he is in Georgia, however, he makes sure to personally greet all of his employees. I have only met him twice before. The first encounter saw him down and out in a dire situation, while during the second he was on cloud nine with happiness due to Iberia TV. After 12-year hiatus, resuming its broadcasting, getting its life back and celebrating the first New Year's Eve on air. Therefore, allow me to officially welcome him at our program. Mr. Okuashvili, now it's your turn to say your greetings to our viewers and tell us about yourself.
Hello, Ms. Tatunashvili, dear viewers, the studio, and everyone else. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you for taking interest in me. I'm ready to answer all of your questions.
Very well, let's start, as the tradition goes, with the happiest period in any man's life, the childhood. Regardless of the events that transpired during it, people usually remember it the best. I also happen to know that your childhood took place in the peaceful, normal period under the aegis of worthy parents and that you went to a decent school in Tbilisi. We would be happy to hear about your brightest memories and impression from your childhood.
And let me give you a synopsis of my life then. I was born and grew up in Tbilisi's Vera district with my grandparents raising me. I went to public school number 55, also in the same district. It was a well-known school with enhanced English language studies. I think that for any of us, the school years are among the best, as in that age, people tend to look at absolutely everything with a positive attitude.
Tell us about your parents.
My father was an engineer. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But my childhood memories of him always involve him building something. And in a sense, I'm constantly building something as well. We had plans, we built something, it was destroyed, and now we're building again. I hope we will have support, means and rights to do so. Time goes on, civilization develops, and what happened before can no longer happen today. So all of us can and have to gain access to the right to build. As for my mother, despite her being a doctor,
And beautiful woman, as far as I know.
yes, it was my father who constantly advised me to become one as well.
And you took that advice.
I always listen to advice, especially from my parents, but I can't say that I always go along with it. There is always my own decision.
Even back then?
Yes. But then again, I liked medicine and was attracted to hardship and adversity. Back then I thought that getting enrolled in a medical university was tough. So I studied well, determined to overcome a competition stiffer than anywhere else. So it goes.
An interesting character trait for a 16-year-old boy, no doubt. By any chance, was your choice of specialization based on that trait as well? You have very difficult specialization, anesthesiology and intensive care. Is that correct?
It is. I practiced at the Republican Hospital and worked there for some time as well. The specialization was no cakewalk, indeed. Not to mention there were other difficulties going on. It was a time of perestroika after all, and I had to do a different kind of anesthesia and intensive care. The domestic one, if you catch my drift.
So, some people needed anesthesia and some required intensive care. Mr. Okuashvili, how did the traits you had acquired help you in your non-medical activities, and how often did you have to make use of them in endeavors such as rebuilding, another kind of resuscitation, if you will? Have you ever applied to Hippocrates' oath to other aspects and events in your life?
We acquire traits throughout our entire existence, and the period we are discussing was the one of focus on university studies. Naturally, I use the traits you described in everyday life. I would have used them even if I never became a doctor, as they are applicable everywhere. It is all about being daring enough to make decisions, perfecting your craft, as well as selflessly serving your family and your country. It does not matter if one studies medicine, art, or maybe something technical. These traits are still vital, and they do not necessarily correlate with anesthesiology or resuscitation. These specializations just serve to illustrate the difficulty of making decisions and the burden of human life depending on you. We do not often directly see the dependence, but regardless of whether we are standing at the operating table or not, we still do make such decisions. This is something all of us should acknowledge and understand.
Mr. Okuashvili, were you as principled when making a decision that resulted in a family as wonderful as yours? As far as I know, you were still a student when Mrs. Zaza graduated from the medical university. In fact, you fell in love with your lecturer, is that true?
It is. But in this case, I probably followed my feelings rather than a concrete decision. However, I did not betray my feelings and followed them through to the end. It was no ordinary surprise for NATO or for her parents to cope with.
Was there such a problem?
Of course.
What do you mean?
I mean, I was a student, NATO was a lecturer, and even though there were only 3 years of age difference between us, it was still quite weird by standards and traditions of that time. It took a lot of insistent and passionate action on my part to convince people and sort the situation out. Not to mention that it was all quite emotional.
You're telling me an amazing story here. Tell me then, what did you like most about NATO when you first saw her?
You're asking me a difficult question, but okay. The first thing a man likes about a woman is her looks.
Appearance, all right.
It all starts with this. And I do not know what happens next in nature, which electric charges meet which, and what emotions collide. However, this attraction was mutual, and when I talk about appearance, I do not single it out. Appearance includes everything else, and I acknowledge that.
Of course.
I acknowledge that, like I said.
And the result was 2 amazing children about whom you're going to talk later. Mr. Okuashvili, you told us about the prejudice against marrying a student, and it was indeed quite strong in times of your youth. Was that the reason why you decided to get involved in small business? To have your own income? As far as I know, your first business was a small ton bakery at Sairm Street, which produced delicious bread.
I can't really say that I started baking bread in order to have a family, as I already had one by that time. However, it was then that perestroika emerged, and given that I was, and still am, rather active by nature, I liked it, and the practical opportunities it provided. Back then there was massive poverty. To survive, you had to rely on your family. If you didn't have it, you had to rely on your parents. If you didn't have parents, then you had to rely on relatives, friends, neighbors, and so on. My anesthesiological practice at the Republican Hospital has afforded me a diploma, but a doctor's income back then was laughable, if it existed at all. This fact spurred me to become active elsewhere the moment I got an opportunity. Together with students in my group, we discussed this chance we were given and decided to start baking this delicious tonne bread. My father wasn't happy at all.
Why?
At least you got some use out of that white lab coat, he said.
You turned it into a baker's outfit.
Sticking bread to the inside of an oven, like professionals do, was not easy. I observed and I tried. I failed and tried again. It is heavy labor. The heat coming out of an oven is incredible. Soon I realized that I won't be able to continue like that for long, and decided to do something else for a living.
Something not as hot, I guess.
However, it was not all without merit. Small as the bakery was, it still allowed me to see for myself how even the tiniest things affect the function of any organization. It was service, after all. I understood that punctuality and attention to detail matter. Bread had to be ready early morning, all bakers had to be present, discipline had to be maintained. Still, if I came to check, at 5 in the morning, mind you, and saw that some of the people were missing, I would roll up my sleeves, whip up the dough, put it in the oven, and make sure the bread was ready. Alternatively, I would go to the absentees' homes and bring them to the bakery. Running a gig like this, despite its tiny size, taught me a lot about sales, procurement, human resources, knowing your street, knowing your neighbors, catering to clients, and so on. In truth, this little tonne bakery was a scale model of what I have now.
It seems you have put that little laboratory of yours to good use.
Indeed, the business went well for a while. In just a few months, our bakery became quite successful and expanded, establishing itself as a self-sufficient organization. Unfortunately, my father's suspicions and fears about me not using my white coat as intended were confirmed. After a while, though, I no longer had the time to run the bakery and gave it away to another person. This is pretty much how my business career started.
There is a similar trend. Youngsters try not to miss a single chance to establish themselves one way or another and start their own thing. But I doubt you'd argue that even today there is still a stigma, a stereotype that a doctor should not bake bread, that an academician should not get his hands dirty, and so on. Can you say that you, from the very beginning, were such a free thinker that you did not have any standards about what a man should and shouldn't do? Where does this freedom in your character come from?
I could say that I was, and still am, a free thinker, but my standards are very strict and I am firmly committed to them. My freedom is not limitless, after all. Even my wishes adhere to a standard, although I admit that it might be broader than usual. I never had any kind of superiority complex about that, though. I'm very direct and frank to people whom I have a productive relationship with, and I'm not going to restrict myself if it is going to cost me information, business, relations, or even people.
I know about yet another of your traits, which is intransigency. This is not something known to me alone, though. You demonstrated it to entire Georgia a few years ago. I'm talking about the time when the entirety of your hard work and thought, scores of employees, and Iberia TV company, who was very loud arrival in media space with its different format and different ideas, became threatened and later ended up destroyed. You were the only person who stood in the spotlight protesting, while many other businessmen opted for compromises, took the government's offers, and did anything to survive, stay afloat, save their families, and so on. You defiantly told them, your own colleagues, not to do so, and set the example of intransigency yourself. Mr. Okuashvili, have you during that period ever had a thought of giving up a little something in exchange for a bit of calm and stability, for sparing yourself so much trouble and danger? Have you never shown simple human weakness for at least a second?
No, I've never had such a thought, but neither did I miss meetings or negotiations. Either I went to them or they came to me. I do not have time to tell you the whole story here, but the thought you mentioned had never occurred to me for one simple reason. As you previously said, all that I had built, created, acquired, and employed was thanks to freedom. And therefore, it was all dear to me, and one does not give up such things. Had I given up my freedom, I would have lost myself, my identity, and everything else. You talk about creation. Had I put what I created on the scales and weighted it against nothing, I would have betrayed everything I was and all I believed in, along with my entire upbringing. The other pan of the scales should have also had something that truly appealed to me, or at least something that had labor put into it. It was also an issue of faith in the future. Because how can one talk to the next generation, or even to one's own children, about the future? If he had given up everything previously achieved for preserving something fleeting, something minute. Of course, the notion of compromise exists, but it exists only when the exchange is equal. And I doubt that back then the struggle was about items, subjects, or businesses. It was about personalities, and also about the future and the fear for it. These were the main pillars, I think. Naturally, there also was economic interest at play, because some people simply cannot think beyond that. Now, there were all kinds of people involved, and I respect them all, despite their priorities in life. But I think they're too global in their thinking. They did not want the people to have freedom, the right of choice, the right to property, or even families. And you cannot compromise on such things, regardless of what is offered in return. Had I been offered freedom, I would have given what I had up, but the struggle was not about that. I stood to lose everything: my identity, my future, and my freedom. What else is there to talk about? That's how I looked at things, and naturally I was quite determined in this regard. There was no decision to make. It was only about the way I was and whether I would betray it. Of course, the times were tough, much tougher than what we are able to describe today. For example, one day I was sitting in my office when I saw 12 police cars gather outside, one after another. This was a psychological pressure attempt. They wanted to intimidate me, to make me think it was a police raid. The same happened on the second day, and I was conflicted about whether I should stay and meet them head-on. There was all that. There were direct talks, personal meetings, and offers from people who orchestrated all this. But I confronted them with my clear-cut, firm, and realistic position. Which is why I advised other businessmen to first and foremost retain their selves, to remember that we have freedom of choice and association, that our laws need to have freedom as well, although within rational limits. Unfortunately, all that we have, be it our country, future, families, or power, can crumble. But it can also be rebuilt. All of us create something, be it big or small, but what matters is thinking about the future. And it's in building this future that all of us should participate. All of us should contribute bricks to that construction. And these bricks should be something we can be proud of, not ashamed of. It beats having to explain why you gave up this or that. I do not need explanations. You simply should not give up something that you are not meant to. This is my idea of freedom.
I think making your friend would be a tough task, and so would being on your team. What kinds of people do you consider most loyal?
Like I said, those who abide by the same principles as I.
And how big are the numbers?
Big enough. There are many such people around me and by my side. There are quite a few of them in our country. The trick is in finding and recognizing them. By God's grace, they are worth recognizing.
How do you deal with the betrayal? Has anyone close to you ever betrayed you?
Living with people I have unity of thought with, while not without benefits, is sometimes tough, to the point of being physically taxing. But I have never experienced a betrayal coming from this circle. However, other people do not lead such lives or follow such discipline. And we can't avoid that, because we are surrounded by all kinds of people. And even though I'm not judging, there are still significant differences in traits, natures, and attitudes. Still, I haven't experienced betrayal from there either.
Rich people usually avoid involving relatives in their businesses. Why do you have such a tendency?
Your previous question about betrayal has made me think. First of all, I would like to say that my thinking is built on positives.
That's great thinking.
Positive things remain, and the negative ones disappear. And I do not want them to burden and discomfort me. As for employing relatives, at the moment we have thousands of people employed. And yet, we are still trying to reach the numbers we had in the past.
What number?
Approximately 3,000 employees, with 500 involved with television alone, and being someone's relative is clearly not a factor here. Still, I could meet a new person at a market or at a garage sale and offer him a job. Now, you're probably wondering about people saying, this guy is Zaza's relative and so on. But in my case, relation is not viewed as such. There is such proximity, such loyalty, that being related simply does not come into play.
That's a good thing.
I employ relatives. Of course it is. I know my relatives and what they're able to do. In a business such as mine, there is a broad spectrum of topics. And when you go looking for people capable of covering them, you naturally first think about people you know, and if they happen to be your relatives, friends or acquaintances, so be it. Reliance is not based on relation, but we are always happy to remember that relatives, friends, and people you know possess or are proficient in skills we need and can employ in our business.
I remember your first greeting to the Iberia TV company very well. It was November 16, 2015, when the restored company with the new package and new content went on air to broadcast a new product, and you emphasized the word professionalism in your speech several times. We are indeed gradually acquiring more and more professional skills, and this is becoming our trademark trait. But tell me this. Do you think Georgian media in general currently has a deficit in the kind of professionalism you meant in your speech back then? What's your opinion on modern media? You have recently been awarded with a Golden Wing, and I know that this award means a great deal to you.
This award is indeed very important to me, because, as far as I know, possessing an award for contributing to freedom of media makes me proud. And while I recognize that this award is traditionally meant for journalists, me receiving it means that all of us are appreciated for having contributed to freedom. the journalists, the viewers, the people in general. There is a whole list out there. But the fact that makes this award all the dearer to me is that we received it not because we brown-nosed the government or earned their goodwill through indefensible decisions that pandered to it, but because we contradicted and criticized it.
Because we approach it objectively.
We had to. And 12 years later, time flies quickly. Our actions floated to the surface, and I am proud to say that I had contributed to them. However, they would have been impossible without unity of journalists, viewers, the public, and the country in general. What matters is that this reward was not symbolic, that it was acknowledged, and that this trend continues. This energy must be retained, and our people must see once again that regular citizens and journalists alike know their own worth and the power to contribute significantly to our lives. That it is they who choose our government and decide how much it gets paid, not vice versa. This is how civilization is built, democracy is created, and the voice of freedom heard. And only after acknowledging this can a person decide the future for oneself, one's family, one's country, and so on.
Another well-known trait of yours is forgiveness. And without listing all the people you have forgiven a great deal of faults, I would only like to say that I welcome such a quality in a man.
Forgiveness is a very broad term, and while we all need to be magnanimous and forgiving, as I've already said, I base my thinking on positivity and do not dwell on negativity and the past. However, this does not mean that our forgiveness should violate the rules, break the laws, and permit someone's irresponsibility simply on the basis of being forgiven. Or being able to forgive, by the way. This is very important, once again, for our future. And even while a human being is able to forgive, the law demands responsibility. A law is a law, and while it does not hound our every step, it must not be bent. One should take responsibility for any and all misdeeds committed. And by the way, the same goes for those who forgive. No one has the right to go against rules and laws just because he considers himself kind or magnanimous.
Mr. Okuashvili, you have devoted a large part of your life to a country as significant to world history and modernity as the United Kingdom. You spend a lot of time in London. What do you like about the British and conversely dislike about Georgians? Can you, as a businessman, tell us that?
I strongly doubt that your program has enough time for a list of everything I like about the British. But still, They are located at the highest tier of civilization, a center of the world, if you will. Almost everything in the world starts from there. I've been to and worked in many other countries and liked them a lot. But Britain holds a special place in my heart, which is the reason why I became its citizen. So, let us leave it at that and let other, more knowledgeable people deal with detailed descriptions. Now, what was that special thing I saw about Great Britain? Well, a citizen of that country can rightfully consider himself a full member of society, and all the while feeling the full responsibility, freedom and power associated with the title, both his before the country and his country's before him. This is something we haven't yet acknowledged or achieved. Here, a person is constantly in debt to the government, regardless of what he does, while it should be vice versa, actually. It is the government that gets paid via taxes taken from every single citizen, which in turn makes it responsible and indebted to every one of us.
And when do you think we are going to achieve such a state of affairs?
Well, we will, if we talk about it and make our society acknowledge it. Isn't that what the media is for? If there is talk, it reaches ears. And if owners of these ears believe in the future, over chasing minute, fleeting and modern pleasures, this is, I think, definitely possible. Time heals all kinds of wounds, as the saying goes. And we will definitely achieve what we want if we fervently and sincerely desire this change. However, we must accelerate this process for ours and the country's common good.
Let's talk about your two wonderful sons, Rati and Georgi, who currently study in London. I know that you have received many letters of gratitude from their college and school alike, all of which praised their upbringing and remarked on rarity of having such students. I think that the father-son relationship is markedly different from father-daughter or mother-son relationships, that there is a sort of a manly corner to which not even mothers and grandmothers have the access. What do you most often talk to your sons about?
Well, first of all, I try to understand their selves and their interests, and then follow them. I learn a lot about their peers from them and talk to them about things they're surrounded by. Then I provide practical advice. This must be done very carefully in order not to tire them. They have plenty of work to do in the college already, so my advice must not be tiresome, mentoring or dogmatic. It is hard to take such advice, and even harder to follow it. So I mainly slip it into conversations about their interests. Although we do talk plenty about my own interests as well. You know, places to visit, sports, martial arts. This happens spontaneously. Sometimes we even meet, don special clothing, and start sparring. Although their mother often interferes with that. They're going to have interesting lives. That's for certain. When I left Georgia, the situation was dire. We had masked men and soldiers ordering people around with impunity. And although I remained for 3 or 4 months trying to reason with them, the power of my words gradually diminished, while theirs grew. They were driven by a revolutionary spirit, and their numbers constantly swelled. There no longer was a point in me staying here, but this was not the case for my children. I wanted them to grow up Georgian, and if I decided otherwise, they would have become foreigners in their own land. Eventually they did go abroad, but in an age when they would remain Georgians regardless of their location. This was both NATO's wish and my own premeditated decision, and it worked. When I left them, Georgi, my youngest, was 3 years old, and we had a nanny helping us around the house. By the way, she was Russian. Kids addressed her as grandma. One day, she told NATO that Georgi behaved strangely, speaking Georgian with an accent, and proclaiming during breakfast that he was Zaza. Our nanny got a bit scared and asked him why he said that. He replied, "The family needs a Zaza, and since father is abroad, I am Zaza now. You can call me Georgi again when he comes back." Upon hearing that, our nanny calmed down. Everything was fine. So that's pretty much what he said. The family needs a Zaza, and since father is abroad, I am Zaza now. Amazing, isn't it? Naturally, times were hard, but we didn't have a problem with seeing each other. NATO would often visit me, sometimes on a weekly basis, although we spared our kids the troubles of traveling. Still, this was hard for all of us, because children grow up very fast, and for their parents, not seeing them means missing out on moments and milestones in their lives that happen only once. And we had a hard time not missing out. Still, our children grew up with discipline, standards and requirements that we consider proper, but also with a lot of freedom. They know that they have to apply themselves to achieve anything. One can be talented, smart and capable, but without putting in effort, one will never see results. I hope to instill this message in them.
All right. What about your sporting career? But before we start, I'd like to share one small detail with our audience. Back in the day, our company's headquarters had a door that never opened. As it turned out, behind it was Mr. Okuashvili's personal gym, equipped with top-notch gear, where he trained in kickboxing and karate. This gym was later scrapped and is currently being remade into a studio for one interesting project. But Mr. Okuashvili, why did you allow it? Why did you throw this gym to the wolves, I wonder? By the way, our viewers should know that you have 3 dans in kickboxing and 2 in karate. As far as I know, even today, you actively practice yoga. When did you develop a taste for martial arts? What do these distinctly oriental sports give you, and why did you specifically choose them?
What, you're surprised at me letting the gym get demolished? Don't be, because in fact that never happened. Dojo, the sparring ground, is still intact, and I do not plan to give it up for absolutely anything. If I need to move it somewhere, I will keep it intact until I have the alternative fully built up and equipped. Therefore, it still stands. As for my interest in martial arts, I've had it since childhood. For me, martial arts are life. They are natural, and taking in this life, this naturalness, in a simple, mechanical way, is a source of great pleasure for me. In my daily life, I follow rules, and the same goes for the dojo. Except everything transpires much faster. Our actions in life that might take years are reduced to quick, explosive bursts of activity at the dojo. It is a very interesting thing to experience. Essentially, it allows me to unwind. At that time, I do not think about anything. My mind is clear and focused, oriented only towards the present task. In the UK, I go to a special Sendo school. We competed in Spain and received invitations from many other countries. Although I sometimes have to explain that my business partners will not understand such behavior, as it involves risk. Still, sometimes we find the so-called windows of about 2-3 months of guaranteed free time, which is not an easy thing to do. And we go compete, usually successfully. Sometimes I visit Georgian kickboxing and karate groups and see familiar faces such as Master Tamazi, Master Rafi, Master Duraya, and others. They are all my friends. Master Rafi runs 7 schools, and in Spain we have Ricardo, who runs 23 schools. Martial arts unite us, and I am proud to contribute to such developments abroad. We have our plans for Georgia as well, and we're going to see how they turn out.
Horse riding is another of your passions, isn't it?
It started with the act of clearing my mind and achieving focus. Perhaps any other sport features disengagement from one's physical form, but for me it happens with martial arts and yoga, the act of focusing on the current moment. And the same goes for horse riding, by the way. However, in all other aspects, it is worlds apart. Human form fascinates me, and before we invented cars, we used horses to get around. And our bodies took to it naturally. I often wonder why. Communicating with a horse, getting an opportunity to communicate, even just by holding its reins, was a new and interesting experience for me. I think horses are very clever animals. Such mental acuity is found in very few other species.
You mentioned cars, yet another of your hobbies. Mr. Okuashvili, I know that you accept no shades of grey in your life, which probably explains your affection for Maserati cars.
I liked cars since I was a little boy. First, there was Zhiguli, then came Volga. Actually, no, the first car was a Moskvich. Both my father and grandfather had one. Then there was Volga.
Volga 24th or 31st?
Volga 21, actually. I have driven cars since early childhood, to the point of scaring people who could not see me behind the wheel. Then, sometime later, my affection switched to Zhiguli 06. Which I drove in a rather risky and reckless way. Our neighborhood even had races, which I always led, or at least tried to. This was how my love story with cars started. After leaving socialism and switching to capitalism, we saw the advent of new cars, the first of them being BMW, which I like to this day. In the meanwhile, my business grew and expanded. We signed a contract with General Motors and then with Opel. I won't lie to you. On that fateful Sunday, when I saw the first Opel painted in Iberia livery arrive, I got up, asked for its keys, and then went on to drive around the entire Tbilisi and even its outskirts. I loved this car. It left a great impression on me. Since then, I have changed many Opels, given that we were partners with the company. I love cars. I love movement. I love action. Throw a Maserati into the mix and you will understand what the core of my feelings and attitudes is like.
Mr. Okuashvili, one more question and we will switch into a blitz interview. Despite you answering my questions in a very measured, precise and business-like way, I still have a suspicion that somewhere deep down you might be hiding a bit of sentimentality and romanticism, a bit more warmth than you usually show. Am I right?
I like creativity, and I think that creativity is inevitably accompanied by the things you have listed. Regardless of how you put it, it is impossible to create something without art and feeling, no matter how technical, even if it's a business. So naturally, I am both romantic and emotional.
Do you cry often?
We all have to control our emotions. I always try to smile in a difficult moment, even in martial arts. This gives one an opportunity to continue acting, to continue moving, because it is hard to keep moving if you dwell on every bump in your life journey. Tears are sometimes pleasant, sometimes irritating, but behind them there is still a human being. I don't deny that. We should be the way nature intended us to be. But this doesn't mean that just because we are crying and life is hard, we should give up on our work and aspirations.
Იმიტომ რომ წრემლი გაქვს თვალთან თუ განცდა თუ ვერ შეიკავე თავი ხანდახან ხდება არა საქმეს უღალატოთ.
Mr. Okuashvili, I would like to ask a few blitz questions that I have come up with spontaneously during our conversation. Let's start with clothing. Which brand is your favorite?
Is this a blitz interview or what?
Which item do you never leave your home without?
A communication device, a phone.
How do you view time? Is it your friend or your enemy?
A friend.
Which genre of music do you like the most?
I like many.
Namely?
Classical music, jazz, improvised music, folk, modern. I like music in general.
Do you play an instrument yourself?
I used to play one, if it can be called that. I still play something at home from time to time. Back in the day, I was an awarded piano player. There was a contest held in Artec, and I won it. I was very proud. I remember my friends telling me then that they could imagine anything but me taking to the piano with such passion. My victory came as a total and complete surprise to them.
How do you deal with the defeat?
I do not deal with it. I immediately recover and start planning my future actions and responses. Especially so if I think that the defeat was unjustified.
What is your greatest fear?
It's not fear, it's more of a worry about our future being on the right track. I can't really say that I'm afraid of something or that I view something in a negative light. On the contrary, we need to be positive while planning our future correctly. We need to be sure we're going the right way.
Can you name a person who has had a great influence on your life?
Most of us grow up in families, so naturally, these influential persons were my parents.
What advice would you give today's young, newbie businessmen? Do you think they have it easy?
When doing a business, do not think about scale. One should possess a fuel economy, as modern cars do. Be efficient in your endeavors and make the most rather than the least of the time you have. You only have one life. You won't have any time after that.
What do you want your legacy to be like? What would you like for your descendants to say and think about you?
I would probably want them to consider me a fighter for truth and the future.
Do you have a dream, or do you prefer specific actions aimed at a concrete goal?
I dream of living in and contributing to a just country with all the right choices and responsibilities associated with it.
Thank you for coming to the interview. I wish you success in your endeavors and our common endeavor as well. Please be so kind to leave your autograph here, and then we will bid farewell to our audience for now.
Thank you as well for inviting me to the interview. I am always ready to answer questions on subjects you raised today.
Our guest today was Zaza Okuashvili. See you later, and thank you for your attention.